Thank you very much, sir, and good afternoon, sisters and brothers, and thank you for having the discipline that some other people, I don't know what some other people are doing, thank you for having the discipline to come here to this session this afternoon. And in fact, let me keep on this the thing that I've started with, because some of you may know that yesterday evening I spoke on a platform with the brilliant campaigning lawyer Gareth Pearce, and also with Sheila Coleman of the Hillsborough Justice Campaign. And when I spoke, I said that it is an incredible privilege for me to share a platform with two of the most inspirational fighters that I've ever had the privilege of sharing a platform with. And to be sharing a platform this afternoon with Janet is for me like completing my hat-trick. And I don't mean some, Harry Kane, 2 penalties and a deflection off the back of his heel hat-trick. I mean a proper left foot, right foot, header, classic hat-trick, because Janet Alder is one of the most dogged, one of the most doughty and one of the most determined campaigners I have ever met and ever had the privilege of sharing a platform with. I don't use the term pleasure, although it's always a pleasure to be in Janet's company. I don't use the term pleasure, because the circumstances in which we're speaking and the subjects that we're talking about are not subjects that it is a pleasure to be talking about. In fact, it is an outrage and a disgrace that we're still having to talk about these particular issues, because it is, and Janet will speak for herself, it is 20 years now that she has been fighting to get justice for her brother Christopher. 20 years since Christopher was killed by the state, and there was an anniversary demonstration at Easter that Janet invited me to come and speak at. And the truth is, of course, that not only should Christopher's death never have happened, given that it did happen, and Christopher, somebody who was in the army, who fought for his country, who should have been treated with respect and dignity, but who instead died a horribly undignified death on a police station, which Janet will talk to you about. So not only that should not have happened, but it should not be the case that 20 years later, Janet and her family are fighting for justice. And why do I say that? Why? Because by definition, of course, you've heard Naylor say that this is 25 years since the death of Stephen Lawrence. So Christopher's death, 5 years after that, and after the initiation of a campaign, the Stephen Lawrence family campaign, that led to an inquiry that concluded in 1999 with the Stephen Lawrence inquiry report written by Sir William Macpherson, which, when it was presented to Parliament by the then Home Secretary Jack Straw, he promised that it would lead to a step change in society's attitude to race relations. That's the phrase that he used, a step change, because finally there was the recognition that deep within the heart of British society there existed institutional racism. The idea of institutional racism, that the police, the political establishment, that the education system, the housing system, the way that councils operate and so on, has racism deep within its structure, was something that was completely rejected. In fact, the term institutional racism was one that was largely confined to small political meetings or academic debating circles. It wasn't something that was placed right at the heart of our understanding of how society operates. But that was something that the Stephen Lawrence family campaign achieved through the Stephen Lawrence inquiry. The definition that Sir William Macpherson came up with, the existence of unwitting prejudice and so on. It was a weak, wishy-washy definition which in many ways was designed to provide the Metropolitan Police and its then Commissioner, Sir Paul, and I have to say the word carefully, Sir Paul Condon. It was designed to provide him with a bit of a get-out clause to essentially exonerate the police for the disgraceful way in which they really failed to investigate Stephen Lawrence's murder in 1993 and allow the people responsible for that murder to escape justice. It was not until January 2012 that 2 of the men, David and Norris, amongst them, were finally two of the guys whose names were given to the police within 24 hours of Stephen's murder in 1993, not just by one person, but by a whole series of people. The police said there was a wall of silence when Stephen was killed. That there was supposedly a golden hour, a short period after the commission of a crime, when the provision of information allows the police really to solve that crime. The police claimed that there was no golden hour. Instead, there was a wall of silence from the local community. There was no wall of silence. They were told time and time again by a whole number of people, these are the people responsible. It was not until 2012 that 2 of those men were put behind bars. So a rotten and corrupt investigation and a long, determined campaign that the family had to fight, which led to the publication of that report. We were promised a step change. If you look at the situation today, 25 years after Stephen's murder, however many years it is, 20-odd years since the publication of that inquiry, and the things that were exposed at that inquiry, the reasons why Macpherson was forced to draw that conclusion about the existence of institutional racism are unquestionably still there. Stop and search was the biggest bone of contention that was raised by people at the inquiry. The argument was put that black and minority ethnic people are disproportionately stopped and searched by the police. At the time, you were 6 times more likely to be stopped and searched by the police if you were black than if you were white. Does anyone want to guess? Well, there was a report that was published last year, reluctantly published by the Home Office last year into Stop and Search. Does anyone want to guess what the disproportionality is in terms of Stop and Search now? Anyone want to have a guess? 6 times. In other words, it is exactly the same as at the time that that report was published. Deaths in custody, a whole raft of arguments by groups such as Inquest, the Deaths in Custody charity, that there is a massive disproportionality in deaths at the hands of the police. Again, a report that was commissioned by the Home Office, that was prepared at the beginning of last year, but which the then Home Secretary, I forget her name, Amber Rudd, whatever happened to her, didn't want to publish, but was forced to publish at the end of last year, which recognised the huge levels of disproportionality in deaths in custody. And in the months between the completion of that report and its publication, a whole series of further deaths. In the summer of last year alone, the names unfortunately tripped too easily off the tongue. Rasan Charles, Edson DaCosta, Darren Cumberbatch. And we had at the end of last year a report that was produced by the Labour MP David Lamont that looked at the experience of black and minority ethnic people within the criminal justice system. And he said some things which those of us who work, I'm a criminal lawyer, knew about. That you are not only you're far more likely to be stopped and searched, you are then much more likely to be charged if you're black than if you're white. If you're charged, actually, you're more likely to be found not guilty. And what does that tell us? It tells us that you were wrongly fitted up for a crime that you hadn't committed in the first place. But if you are convicted, you are much more likely to go to prison, and much more likely to go to prison for longer than if you are white. Those are things that he exposed in the report that was published in the autumn of last year. But it doesn't just stop with the criminal justice system. You look at a whole number of other areas. You look at schools, disproportionately likely to be excluded, disproportionately likely to be put in the set where you're less likely to achieve examination success. And as a consequence of all of that, less likely to go to the more supposedly prestigious Russell Group universities. Almost impossible, for example, if you're black and born in this country, to get into an Oxford colleges. There are Oxford colleges that have not offered a place to a single black British-born student for a decade. What is that is going on? And you look at other areas, employment. If your name is Begum or Mohammed, then you might forget about putting in a job application because you know that Mr. Smith is going to get the job before you are. Or look at one of the biggest scandals that we've seen over the last year, Grenfell. And you look at the roll call of the people who died in that fire and think of the reasons why they died, because they lived in a building which the local council had such contempt for that they were prepared to clad it in essentially 30,000 litres of petrol because they wanted to make that building look more attractive to the people who had to look at it rather than safe for the people who lived in it. That is the scandal of the society that we continue to live in, a society where institutional racism is deeply embedded within its structures. And therefore, there is still a real battle for justice. The fact that rather than investigating Christopher's death, the police were more interested in investigating Janet Alder and therefore sending spies into her justice campaign to try and dig dirt up and discredit her, shows just how rotten and institutionally corrupt society that we live in is. And therefore we have to do something about it. I'm not going to, for once, uncharacteristically not going to take up my whole time, because I want to allow Janet as much time and I want to allow as much time for discussion as possible. What that shows us, I think, is that racism, we're often told, aren't we, that racism is about jackbooted, narrow-eyed fascists on marginalised council estates. And yes, of course, those people are a real problem, and we have to do something about them. But where do they get their confidence and courage from? They get their courage and confidence from the racism that starts not at the bottom of society, but at the top of society. It was our then Home Secretary, now our Prime Minister, Theresa May, who created the hostile environment for illegal migrants that meant that people who were brought up in this country, part of the Windrush generation, who dedicated their lives to serving people in this society, were told when they reached retirement age, you're not British, you're not welcome here, get out, stay out, or if you need healthcare, you pay £55,000 for the privilege of getting it. That came from Theresa May. She was the Home Secretary who sent those vans scuttling around local areas close to Grenfell, telling people, if you're an illegal migrant, watch out because we're coming from you, you better get out. The racism comes from the top of society, but it does in turn embolden the fascists, doesn't it? It is precisely that has given confidence to the people who are rallying round Tommy Robinson, who feel that they can march on our streets next weekend. And that is why there are a number of things that we have to do. We have to challenge racism in all of its forms. It is one of the principal means by which the people at the top seek to divide our side, seek to divide our class, to make working class white people think that they're enemies. The reasons why they can't get a place for their kid in school, the reason why they can't get a hospital bed, the reason why they can't get a decent home is because it's being taken by some bogus asylum seeker who's just come over here and jumped the queue, rather than it being a consequence of a rotten, corrupt society where the rich and powerful look after their own, where they bring the economy to its knees, as they did in 2008, and then turn around and put the billions of pounds back into their own pockets at the expense of all of us. That is why they use racism to divide us, and there are those, the fascists, the far rights, the likes of Tommy Robinson and his jackbooted supporters, who want to foment that kind of division. And that is why we have to deal with those people. We have to be out on the streets next weekend against the likes of Robinson, and of course against Trump on the 13th, because Trump is essentially the chief commanding officer of this on an international scale, the rotten racism and division. We have to be out against him on the 13th, against Robinson and his followers on the 14th, but we have to go beyond that as well. We have to challenge racism in all of its forms, not just getting rid of the fascists on the streets, and therefore above and beyond the 13th and the 14th and defeating the far right and the fascists, we have to build a struggle for a better, a different society, one based upon love and solidarity and now collective interest. Thank you.
And thank you for being so disciplined there, Brian. It was spot on. And isn't it interesting that actually this is a year we saw them attack the Windrush generation, and the sheer hypocrisy. While doing that, Theresa May did actually announce that we were going to have a commemorate Stephen Lawrence Day. 25 years of trying to seek justice, and she chooses this year of all years while, deporting his grandparents' generation. So not really much to introduce here, because I know Brian touched on it, but we in the movement, we talk about standing on the shoulders of giants, and I think really it can't be a term more apt. She did. Then I've had the pleasure of speaking alongside Janet over a number of meetings, and it's always a pleasure to hear her speak. The enthusiasm and still the anger, but always the enthusiasm to continue to fight to seek justice. So Janet.
I've not grown through my experience without the help and the support of ordinary people, because believe me, the ordinary people weren't there to listen and to believe, because you've got a system that works totally against you. I don't know where I'd be now. I'm just going to start off with Christopher was an ex-paratrooper. He fought for the country. Once he'd served his purpose, he was of no use. All he did was go to a nightclub one night, got assaulted, went to the hospital as a complainant. The police went to see him as a complainant. They dragged him out of the hospital backwards. They said at the inquest that he walked out between them, so it was the first lie. And he dragged out with his feet trailing, stepped into the back of a van, fully compass mentis, and he came out the other side, fully unconscious, with his trousers and box shorts down to his knees with only one button open, and his belt missing, and more severe injuries. He was dragged into the custody suite. This was all seen on CCTV footage. He was thrown on the floor. He was gasping for his life. And the police were stood about, speaking about what they could charge him with, because they can't have him there to prevent a breach of the peace. It took them 2 years before they let us see the CCTV footage. So all we started off with was post-mortem reports, and all the post-mortem reports basically said there was nothing the matter with him. So I couldn't understand why he wasn't stood there today, but this was not a new thing. This is what they do with deaths in custody. They come away, the many, many people that have died in police custody, they basically tell you they don't know how they've died, but they can tell you how Tutankhamun died, but as soon as you die in the custody of the police, they've got no idea. They also try and demonise that person that has died, who's suffered, by going back from maybe 2-3 years of age. Well, they was able to do that because my family was brought up in care. But they will go through they will get all your medical records, and they will try and find something in your medical records to justify your death at the hands of the police. For example, there was a young white guy called Robin Goodenough. He'd sniffed glue when he was about 11, and they tried to blame that on his death when he was about 20 odds in police custody. But what shocked me was when I saw that CCTV footage, I really thought that the system did the right thing. I didn't realise that the CPS was on the side of the police and the IPCC was on the side of the police, who the police and the IPCC are run by the Home Office. I didn't see how the system worked. I honestly thought things were going to be done properly. And when I went to the police station, I think it was the second day, because it was just the way that was being treated by everybody, all the police and whatsoever. Come here, what you doing? Come here, man. I'm thinking, wait a minute, I haven't even done anything wrong here. Why are you talking to me like that? that's what started making me a bit suspicious about, you know, he's died in police custody, yeah, and you're speaking to me like that. Plus, you've got the boy who assaulted him in a bail hostel for 4 weeks away in York, so he couldn't speak to anybody, and they were still looking at charging him with murder, even after the post-mortem said that he wasn't responsible. So I was in so much shock. I picked up all these newspaper clippings for the first 5 days, and it always said, and we've got a guy that's died in police custody, and we've got a guy in custody in connection with the death, and I couldn't weigh him up. So I went to the hospital to where Christopher had been the night, on that particular night, and the consultant came up to me and he said, "What do you want to know? We are bound by law not to say anything because this is a murder inquiry." And I'm thinking, well, the police didn't tell me that when I went. They didn't tell me there was a murder inquiry. Who was a murder inquiry against? So that's what started making me think. So I went to the police station because 2 weeks later, they still didn't know Christopher died. I'm thinking, surely they know his dad or not. No, we don't know his dad yet. We don't know. We've got toxicology tests, this, that, the other to do. And I phoned up the deputy coroner, and he says, I said, shall I get a solicitor? He said, it wouldn't do you any harm. So it was these type of things that were kind of making me suspicious. And then they appointed a black liaisons officer, and Hull had very, very few black people. And she spoke broken English, but I'd been brought up in care. You know, my dad and my mum came from Nigeria, and my dad spoke like that, and I'm thinking, have I got somebody in who's black and speaks broken English, so that they'll believe her, type of thing? And it just, you know, it was spiralling and getting worse. So I went to the police station that particular day, and I went, spoke to this officer. I said, look, I was absolutely petrified because they're intimidating buildings. They're supposed to make us scared, yeah? So I went in, and he said, I said, look, I've got outside organisations to support the family in this. Because I had nobody, I didn't know what to do. This was all new to me. I was in the dark. I thought everything went, you know, made smoothly, like. And he turned around and he says, we don't deal with organisations. He reeled his chair over right to me. We don't deal with organisations, we deal with the family. Yeah, I said, well, I am the family. I said, I'm Janet Alder. I said, I'm Christopher's sister. And at that time, you know, something came on the radio. I thought, get yourself out of here. As I was walking out, I looked at lost property and inquiries. It was full of police officers. You know, when they were all like bobbing their heads in and that, I went, oh. And I got outside and I was just so scared and so broken at that particular time. Yeah, and I can't, you know, I kept pulling myself together, so I did, and I was walking through the whole precinct and whatsoever. And I thought, right, I'm going to this bookshop, and I went into a bookshop and started picking up all these books and that. And then I happened to look at the door, and I saw a plainclothes police officer in navy blue overalls and blue warehouse jacket. And the reason I knew, because he had a notebook in his hand and a badge on it. And I went, oh my God, I said, I'm a bit like a rat. If you corner me, I'll either attack you or I'll, do you know what I mean, shout my mouth off. And I didn't. I just said, look, I said, the police are following me. I said, my brother died in police custody, so everybody went to the door, and then he disappeared. So I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to get a solicitor. So I went round the corner, took all these newspaper clippings into the solicitors, and I said, look at these. So she said, done it, haven't they? I said, yes, it's like the Gestapo. I said, they're following me. So she let me out the back door, jumped into a taxi. I told the taxi driver, he said, get out. So obviously he thought I was in trouble, got on the cross. So the next one, I thought, shut your mouth, just stay in and, you know what I mean, go to the top of your brother's road. As I got out, I thought I'll walk down, and there was a patrol car facing me. I thought, oh my God. No, you know, I've got all these suspicions about them killing my brother. And then I've got these police, you know, police officers. I'm thinking, well, what are they going to do to me? And then I kind of got home, and then it was not long after that a friend of mine introduced me to Maggie and Andy, who basically set off this campaign for me, yeah, and supported me and got me speaking to people around the place and whatsoever. And without that, I would have never, you know what I mean, Andy, the first march I ever went to, Andy took me, and I thought, oh, what's going on here, you know, I thought, we've got all these people doing this. And he went, Mom, we want to know what's happened to Christopher. I said, yeah, we do. Like that. And then from then on, he gave me the courage to start asking these questions that should have been asked and whatsoever. So I then started, you know, questioning the CPS and all the evidence, because what they've done is they knew racism was involved in this, and they knew exactly what happened. So what they did, they gave us mountains and mountains of evidence about the nightclub. Yeah, about 450 pages, and about that much evidence about what was happening in police custody with the police and that and that. So I threw all the big pile away and I thought, I'm going to look at this stuff and that. So prepared ourselves for an inquest. Just before the inquest, I was able to see the horrific video of Christopher's death. We've never seen anything like it. But it went a case of it just died. I'm thinking, well, how's it got like that in the first place? Why haven't they naturally gone to help him? Yeah, why you wouldn't leave anybody that naturally. If somebody would like that, you know, fell or was unconscious on the floor here, you know, one of us had found somebody who knew something about first aid, about putting him in the recovery position, and but this didn't happen. And I'm thinking, there's more to this, there's more to it. But what they do, they put the narrative out to everybody, yeah? So everybody thinks, oh, that's absolutely awful, that. Yeah? And it takes families years and years to start unravelling all these lies. Yeah? All this demonisation of these black men and that powerful and the threatening. And shall I tell you what? The police, if you are a threat, or if anybody's a threat to them or their colleagues, they can kill us. So of course, whenever they kill anybody, the first thing that they say is start demonising this person. He was violent, he was this, he was that, he was this and the other, because they know it's an instant get-out clause. There's never been a police officer successfully prosecuted for a death in custody. And while this goes on, there never will be, yeah? But we went to the inquest, and there was 9 ordinary men and women that stood and watched the video evidence. And they came to the same conclusion as myself and Andy and Maggie and everybody else around us, that Christopher had been unlawfully killed. And I thought, yes, now we're going to get CPS to prosecute him, do you know what I mean? Because it's been proved that he's been unlawfully killed and that. But little did I know that the CPS then spent 4 years collecting the evidence to cancel out any medical evidence that there was. They can pay the experts, yeah, they can get whatever expert in that they want, to give the conclusion that they want. Yeah? We can't do anything about that. And that is how the police officers get away. If we forced them to take them to court because my solicitor had got the evidence, yeah, on top of them 4 years of trying to cancel out any evidence. So they were forced in a position where they went to court, these 5 officers, and little did we know that they destroyed they destroyed Christopher's clothes, they burnt his clothes. Now normally you would keep that in an investigation about us. They cleaned the van. 2 of the officers had CS gas canisters they destroyed. These officers were able to walk out free. It wasn't until about 10 years later that I got the video evidence, and it stated that these officers had CS gassed him and beat him. Yeah, and then left him unconscious. We decided after that, I was quite broken after that, do you know what I mean? And I thought, what we're going to do? But because of the history of these deaths in custody and no successful prosecution, we'd already set it up to go to the European courts. Yeah, the European courts can't give you justice. Yeah, they can give you a judgment. And they judged, and the government at the time wrote what's known as a unilateral declaration. Oh, this will never happen again in deaths in custody and this, that and the other. And I just thought to myself after that, right, I'm going to have to try and get on with my life now and, you know, try and repair things. And in 2000, we'd given Christopher the best funeral that we could. Yeah, at least we thought we did. Only to find out in 2011, in 2000 for his funeral, they swapped his body, and I believe this was the police and the mortuary staff and the funeral directors, all through racism, seeing me standing up and shouting out and in the paper and this, that and the other. They didn't like it. So they swapped his body with a 77-year-old woman. It had been found out early. They knew it was Christopher all the way along. They knew it was a man all the way along. Yeah? And they pretended that they didn't know. If it hadn't been for this other family whose loved ones was in Nigeria who'd been trying for 10 years to get a visa to come home and repatriate her body, insisting on seeing her body, that was when they turned around and says, oops, we opened the bags and it was a man, we didn't know. But they did know. Shall I tell you how they did know? Because they'd been using his body for training purposes all them years that we'd been doing protests and commemorations for Christopher in Hull. Yeah, they were taking the piss and using his body for training purposes all them years. But now, do you know what they've done? They've put a gagging order on me. Yeah, if I tell you the information that I have got there, they willingly gave me it because they knew that the judge would put this gagging order in. If I told you the information that I have got in my house that proves that they knew it was Christopher all the time, I could go to prison. Yeah. So they've not just done that, they've not just terrorised me by spying on me and whatsoever, do you know, and tried to project everything as if I'm the one that in trouble. Yeah, these people are lower than snakes' bellies. And these are the people that we are paying a good wage to, and we're believing all the rubbish that they tell you on television. That's a lot of crap. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade. John Carr from Liverpool. I just want to mention briefly, is that okay? I just want to mention briefly the death of a young lad in Liverpool last year in the name of Meze Mohammed. I can't say too much because the inquest is still going on. But what I can say is that young black lad, fit young lad, died in the care of the police in the town centre in Liverpool. Within days of his death, there was massive anger within the community, and 300 people gathered to march around the streets of Liverpool. Within days of that, there were reports in the local press, the Liverpool Echo, that this young lad, and Janet mentioned it, about the demonising of people who die in police custody. Already they started to demonise this young lad, that he had links with the criminal fraternity, that he'd done this and he'd done that. Now whether that's true or not, as far as I'm concerned, is totally immaterial. No one should die in circumstances like that. Within a week of that first march, there was another march in Liverpool in support of the family and the fight for justice. There were 3,000 people on that march, one of the biggest anti-racist marches that we'd actually seen in Liverpool. And the reason I believe that march was so big was because of Hillsborough. That we'd heard and seen the lies of the police before in terms of what they do. And I'll just give you one example of that. The guy I work with, he was at Hillsborough, and his nephew was 14 years of age, was interviewed by the police for hours and hours on end, basically trying to find out how much drink, how much alcohol he'd had before the football match. Of course, he's only 14, he never had a drink in his life. That is the nature of the police. So, when it comes to the death of this young lad in Liverpool, we knew the role of the police. We knew the role of the media. We knew how the establishment would cover up and blame this young lad for what had happened. In other words, they blame the victims. It's nothing new. That's why the demonstration in Liverpool a week or so after was so big. And one of the first people to speak on that platform in support of the Justice campaign for this young lad were people from the Hillsborough for Justice campaign. And we've continued to support the family, and we will go on and continue. These miscarriages of justice are not accidents, they're down to the nature of the state.
I'm Andy Macon. I've worked with Janet since we started the campaign, and she came to us because we were socialists, we were local SWP activists and anti-racist, anti-Nazi and everything else. And we talked and we thought, we've got a campaign, what do we do? So the first big thing we did was went to the Labour conference, which was being lobbied that year in Blackpool, and Janet came and we took on Mary Molan and argued with her in public on the seafront in Blackpool. That got us going. Janet spoke to people there. But the second big thing that was really important was the Lawrence inquiry, which was in its final stages then, was doing sessions around the country. We went to Bradford, We had a big session in Bradford, and Janet and a couple of other people came in the car with me, and it was packed. It was really, really packed room, hundreds of people there. And we took a leaflet. We ran out of leaflets. Me and Janet photocopied them the second lot in a photocopy shop in Bradford and gave them out. Went round the whole room. Comrade there told us everybody's reading it. And the outcome of that, because we told the story of what had happened to Christopher and the questions we were asking, Neville Lawrence approached Janet and spoke to her for a while, issued a public statement in support of her campaign, which we used in the press. It was in our local paper, and then it spread around other newspapers. Second thing was we got lots of offers of support from the Labour movement, the left, the Black Nation organisations in the north of England, because Janet was getting known. And the third outcome, which we didn't realise at the time, was when they were coming out, a couple of senior police officers came past me in superintendent's uniforms, and later on they held the leaflet, they were talking to each other about it, and copper number 1, who turns out to be Superintendent Holt from West Yorkshire, who was investigating what had happened in Hull at Queen's Gardens Police Station, said, "It's out in the open now, isn't it?" And the interesting thing was that the other senior cop I was talking to was Norman Bettinson, who is now in the frame for Hillsborough and may well face charges. And at that time, they thought, we've got to control this situation, we've got to stop these people being rabble-rousing. And it turns out that some of them have committed far worse crimes than anybody else in the room. And, you know, justice does come around in some forms. But Janet is still fighting 20 years on, and that is tremendous, tremendous achievement, because it's very, very hard to keep a fight up for 20 years. And I think Janet deserves all our applause and all our support.
I would like to just say, I'd really like to encourage women if they'd like to speak. I know we've had a couple of hands on men, but it would be great to have some women comrades.
Thank you. My name is Gordon Davey. I'm from Edinburgh, Scotland. Across the river from Edinburgh to the north is a small town called Kirkcaldy, which is not well known, nor are there many political actions or things of interest going on there. But 3 years ago, a black man called Sheku Bayo was detained in the street by the police. They subsequently called the family at least 4 times on the phone during that day. Each time they called them, the story changed. First of all, they said they didn't know where he was. Eventually admitted that he had died in police custody. The very next day, a statement was issued by the Police Federation of Scotland, the trade union for constables, sergeants and inspectors, saying that the most important thing people must remember is a young woman police officer has been injured during this situation, has been traumatised, and may never work as a police officer again. That has to be remembered because the Police Federation is a highly political organisation who sees its role as defending the police from any criticism. They play an important political role. A couple of days later, to my surprise, both the Daily Record and the Sun in Scotland, 2 normally quite right-wing newspapers, printed 2 pages about this death in police detention with considerable detail, and both had editorials saying the police have questions to answer about this death. Then there was a period of silence. Then a diagram was leaked from presumably from the pathologist, printed in the Daily Record, a mass circulation paper in Scotland, detailing all the bruises, cuts and contusions on Sheku Bayo's body, again calling for answers and explanations. Since then, almost complete silence. 3 years ago, 18 months ago, it was finally stated that there will be a full investigation of this death in police custody, and the First Minister of Scotland, who you will know quite well, Ernest Sturgeon, promised that the investigation would report as promptly as possible. 18 months ago, silence, no report. What this proves to me is the legal system, the top legal officers in Scotland, the equivalent of the Home Office in England, have a political role to play to stifle any discussion of the police role in illegal deaths in police custody, to absolutely stifle it. Because if we were to find out in each and every case what actions the police took which led to these deaths, we would understand that the police play a political role in repressing dissent and are prepared and willing to use violence to do so, and they will not be prosecuted for doing that. Most recent announcement in Scotland is there's going to be an inquiry into the role of police in the miners' strike, 1984 to 1985, in which there were appalling levels of violence by the police against strikers, and many arrests, prosecutions, which failed because of lack of police evidence. 30 years. Are we going to wait 30 years for an investigation into the death of Sekou Waiu? We have to demand it doesn't happen.
Hi, my name is Tony. I'm an SWP member from Edinburgh. Yeah, I'm very sad, I'm very upset, you know, because it's been, am I correct, 25 years since the death of Stephen Lawrence. It's very horrible. It's appalling, it's disgusting. You know, you're trying to live your life and then you just get killed. You know, I mean, before I had an inkling, an idea that there was these racist organisations, but I was racially attacked myself. I was just living my life, and I got attacked and very brutally, very violently, and no one came to my aid, no one helped me. I knocked on the door to the neighbours. I physically dragged myself to the phone box. Thank God there was a phone box, otherwise it would be terrible, you know. But yeah, thank you.
Does it work just like that? I just want to say something about the experience of developing a style of campaigning, which I think we have done over the last 20 years. It might not be clear that Janet wasn't actually in Hull, where her brother died, although she was brought up in Hull. She was living in Burnley in Lancashire. So that gave us some advantages, I guess, because we could be a little bit outsiders and a bit objective about what was going on in Hull. And it meant that we spent many hours in journeys across the M62 in the car, talking and talking and talking, both in a very focused way. Janet's absolutely brilliant at actually spending hours and hours and hours looking through all these appalling documents. She's got a tremendous grasp of detail, and my partner Andy, as the Secretary of Campaign, he's also got a very good grasp of detail. So we thrashed out an awful lot of things in terms of the facts of the situation and got a perspective on them. On the other hand, what was also really, really important was to keep Janet's involvement in broader anti-racist and anti-war campaigns, and that's always, I think, stood her in really good stead in terms of meeting constantly new groups of people coming towards politics, so that we didn't get more and more and more narrowly focused. We got wider and wider and wider focused. Janet wasn't always completely convinced in the early days, but she became she wanted to like that, yeah, indeed. But actually, it gave a really good backbeat, I think, to that 20 years. And was the right thing to do for her, as well as for wider political campaigning. So, as well as lobbies of political conferences, the BNP raised its head in Burnley by 2000 and I can't remember, it was early 2000s, and Janet was absolutely stalwart in that. She knew lots of the football lads from around the pubs and clubs in Burnley, and so, you know, she wasn't frightened. She was prepared to stand right at the front in that campaigning. Trade union conferences, once she got the hang of it, she was really, really pleased to be invited by such a wide range of unions, and they've always been tremendously generous in their donations. The anti-war movement, Janet was immediately, instinctively against war and wanted to be involved in everything. She stood as a parliamentary candidate in London in 2006. Always fantastic at speaking with and to young people and listening to them, which has been a great strength of hers. And recently involving herself in Stand Up to Racism platforms across the north of England. We got the hang of how to challenge the police in public. I was like you beside Janet in a demonstration. She likes to get right up their noses, and you know it's a great. You know when she's not, the focus isn't on her. It's a great way of letting off some steam, isn't it? And finally, just a tribute to Janet's media work. She's always spoken to any journalist generously, not sort of suspicious, and she's always had brilliant media coverage because she's so direct and open and gives them something really to get their teeth into. So no blueprints for a campaign, but that's some of the things that we found important.
Hi. When Janet stood as she stood against David Lammy in the early 2000s, and she stayed with us. And I must say that you have to take your hat off to the determination of not only Janet, but all the other people who keep these campaigns going for year after year after year after year. And my question is always, with any campaign, what next? What next? What next? And that's my question now, what next? Because when we heard about Janet's brother's body not being the body they buried, I just thought, what more insult can you heap on a family than that? That's like the biggest insult after killing somebody or leaving somebody to die, and, you know, maybe whichever. But to do that was the most disgusting insult. And I just think, how do we as socialists keep the campaign going? That's my question.
Do you want to just say a few words and
yeah.
answer some of the questions?
I always used to think to myself, how are so many people within the police just carry on the same kind of lie? And over the years, it made me realise that the brave people are the ordinary people that get up out there and stand. And the police don't ask questions. They're told what to do. Do you know what I mean? Whether it's right or wrong, they'll do it. Do you know what I mean? And, you know, it is the ordinary people that you know, it is you lot that are out there that are the brave people. And you've got to just throw away your chains. Do you know what I mean? Rather die on your feet, do you know what I mean, than begging on your knees type of thing. And we've got to change things. We cannot have this, do you know what I mean? Enough is enough type of thing. Thank you.
I want to pick up on just, well, it's been a fantastic discussion. There are just three things that came out of the discussion that I want to pick up on. Firstly, when Andy spoke about the Bradford meeting of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, it's worth saying a little bit about how the structure of that inquiry was put together, because it was an inquiry in two parts. First of all, the main part of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry in 1998 was in South London at a hall in Elephant and Castle. That's where most of the evidence that was presented to Sir William Macpherson and his panel was presented. But in the second part of the inquiry, they travelled around the country listening to testimony from people in local communities around the country. And that is where, for example, the meeting that Andy talked about in Bradford, where Janet spoke, took place. And those meetings were incredibly important for this reason. The chair of that inquiry, Sir William Macpherson, was not a man known for his commitment to anti-racism. In fact, he had a fairly bad reputation as, I think, an immigration judge who quite systematically rejected people's applications to stay in this country. But he was one of the few retired judges who was available, so he was the person that Jack Straw appointed. And the Stephen Lawrence family didn't want him, complained, and actually had a meeting with Jack Straw, which they said, we do not want this man to be the judge of this inquiry because we don't expect him to reach any kind of decent conclusion. Nevertheless, he reached that conclusion that I talked about the existence of institutional racism in the not just within the Metropolitan Police, but in the police force in general, but also across society. He talked in particular, for example, about education and how institutional racism exists in education, in housing and so on, and set a challenge for the institutions across society to address and eradicate institutional racism. And he did that not just because he had some eureka moment, because he'd suddenly transformed into an anti-racist. It was, in his own words, because of the weight of opinion that was expressed time and time again by the people who came and spoke at the inquiry, people like Janet Alder. Because you would have, essentially, a kind of set-piece situation where, in the morning, you would have the police, or the local council, or the local education authority would come to the inquiry, and they would say, we are not racist, we're committed to anti-racism. And very often, they would produce a document, they'd have to blow the cobwebs off it, and present it showing this is our anti-racist document. But then you would have the people on the ground in the community who would say, yes, we know that they've got their policy document, it means nothing in terms of the reality of our experience at the hands of these institutions. We continue to suffer disproportionate levels of stops and searches, disproportionate levels of deaths in custody, disproportionate levels of exclusion in schools, disproportionate levels of exclusion when it comes to the housing queue and so on. It was because of that Macpherson accepted reluctantly the existence of institutional racism and acknowledged that it existed. So it was precisely because of the activity of people on the ground in local communities. And that is an incredibly important lesson for us to learn. I want to pick up as well on what John said about Mzee Mohammed and, and what happened, the Solidarity March for Mzee Mohammed, because again, that points to an incredibly important lesson. I talked about racism, and it's the experience of those of us in black and minority ethnic communities. We're the people who suffer racism, and as I say, some of that racism, the most horrible immediate form of it, is at the hands of those people who carry out racist attacks. But it's not the most common experience that we have. The most common experience, as I say, is the institutional racism at the hands of the estate. But think about it. Why was it that people marched in solidarity with Mzee Mohammed? Why was it that when the Lawrence family went to the Trade Union Congress in, I think it was 1995, and Neville Lawrence spoke to the Trade Union Congress, the outcome of that was that the union movement unconditionally voted to underwrite the Stephen Lawrence family campaign? Working class people, the organised working class, unconditional support for the Lawrence family campaign. It came about, again, not just by accident, it came about because people understood the miners who suffered at the hands of the state, who had the police sent into their communities by Thatcher during the miners' strike in the 1980s, when they were treated as the enemy within. They understood that the experience of the Lawrence family was at the hands of the state was the experience that they had at the hands of the state. Hillsborough, 96 people go to a football match and die, are killed at that football match, and you had the police demonising them. You had the likes of the Sun newspaper saying that the people who the other supporters were drunk. They stampeded and caused the deaths of their fellow supporters. Not only did they cause those deaths, that they then urinated on the people as they were dying and stole from the pockets of the dead. An absolutely disgraceful smear campaign. The people who built and fought and led the Hillsborough Justice Campaign, who were part of that community, knew who their enemies were. They knew it was the media. They knew that the police had fitted up their loved ones, and they knew who was on their side. And they knew as well that the experience of the likes of the Lawrence family was their experience as well. And it was therefore because the recognition of that common experience that solidarity came about. And the resolutions that were passed at the Trade Union Congress, that came about, again, not just by accident. It came about because activists went around their local communities, went around their local workplaces, their trade union branches, their student union branches, and they took petitions round. They collected money to build and support campaigns. They passed resolutions at their union branches and then sent those resolutions to their national conferences and to the trade union conference and showed what working class solidarity means in practice, in action. That is what it actually means, and that was able to keep those campaigns going. And it's that kind of support and solidarity that we need to carry into the campaigns that continue to exist today. The Christopher Alder Justice Campaign, the Grenfell Justice Campaign. The immediate what next, of course, is to continue to support and build those campaigns and the protests that can give them solidarity as well. You think about it, the 14th of every month is always a solidarity silent march in commemoration of what happened at Grenfell Tower. Well, I think next Saturday, the 14th, there is, those people who say they care about, the people, Tommy Robinson supporters, who care about the cohesion in our communities. If they wanted to do something that was decent and caring and showing love, they should be on the silent march in solidarity with the people who died in Grenfell Tower. But no, they're marching in solidarity with Tommy Robinson, one of the most rotten, rancid racists in our society. That tells you a hell of a lot about what those people are really all about. We have to deal with those people. We have to continue to build those justice campaigns. But I think the big what next is we have to put an end to a society where these kind of atrocities happen in the first place. We know that the police are, the reason why these things happen, again, is not by accident. The police are the first, the first round, if you like, the first part of the state that people encounter when they encounter them on the streets, policing demonstrations, harassing communities, and so on. That is why it's no accident that these things happen. They happen because the police are protecting the power and the privilege of the people at the top of society. And it is only once we have got rid of a society that operates in that way, where law and order and the armed bodies that are there to protect it exist to protect that privilege. It's only by getting rid of that that we will put an end to these atrocities once and for all. And therefore, there has to be a struggle for a better society, a different society. That's what the debates and the discussions at this festival are all about. That's what we in the Socialist Workers Party are about. And that is why, alongside others, who, if you're not a member, you will have heard other people say you should come and join us. And I make no excuse for adding to that invitation. Come and join us. We need you. You need us. We need each other in order to build a better society.